All right, for the latest now, let's go live to New York and continue the conversation with Sherwin, who's at the UN headquarters for us. Sherwin, what more do we know about Hamas and the terms they've agreed to insofar as the ceasefire agreement is concerned, and what has Israel rejected thus far?
Mfundo, this has been such a long, weeks, months-long process in terms of various proposals going back and forth between the two major parties here, Israel and Hamas, but of course facilitated by key mediators, Qatar, Egypt and the United States. So the truth is, we don't know what version of an original proposal Hamas has now signed up for, has signed on to, but we do know what a previous iteration of this ceasefire for hostage deal looked like. It was premised on 3 phases. The first phase would last 42 days. It would then see Hamas free hostages, alive or dead, up to the total of 33, in return for the release of women and children, Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails, to the tune of 30 Palestinian prisoners for every single Israeli hostage released by Hamas. Humanitarian aid would be scaled up, including machinery to remove rubble from Gaza, which you know is proliferated with rubble and stacks of concrete that have fallen in on each other given the bombardments that have now happened for almost 7 months. And then the beginning, Mfundo, of a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops. That's phase 1. Phase 2 would be another 40-day period that would overarchingly seek to restore calm in Gaza. It would seek the withdrawal of most Israeli troops from Gaza, and Hamas would start releasing Israeli soldiers and combatants that they continue to hold. Then phase 3 would essentially end a complete blockade of Gaza, the completion of the exchange of hostages or bodies that are still in either party's care, and a 3 to 5 year plan for the reconstruction of Gaza under the supervision of various countries, including the United Nations, would begin. Why is this a sticking point for Israel? Well, they haven't been specifically clear about what they disagree with in terms of this latest proposal, but we do have the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in his own words, as recent as Sunday, where he said that ending the war now would essentially give Hamas carte blanche to continue focusing attacks on Israel. It would continue to leave them in power in Gaza, and that has for all intents and purposes, been a red line for the Israelis. The Israeli War Cabinet, of course, determined that Hamas's proposal was far from meeting Israel's core demands. Specifically what that means, we don't really know. And we do understand that the Israeli War Cabinet has also signed off on sending a delegation to Cairo for meetings with the mediators, with the Hamas delegation, to see if they can thrash out terms that both sides can agree to here. And as you heard the Secretary General here, the stakes are very, very high, given the dire humanitarian situation that has existed and proliferated across Gaza for months now, exacerbated by the current military offensive that we are now witnessing in the southern city of Rafah, where, of course, remember, millions of people have moved from the north and central Gaza, which essentially has been decimated by this war, and they have now been sheltering in the city of essentially less than 300,000 people, accommodating some 1.2 million plus. And they, as the Secretary General, have nowhere to go. So the stakes very high here. A deal must be reached between the two parties. It's key to what the Secretary General would like to see here.
Sherwin, indeed, the stakes are very high. And I mean, listening to Israel, they've stated that they're determined to dismantle the battalions in Rafah. So meaning here, whatever agreement that must come of this must be one that includes ensuring their security, because they're saying they need to dismantle those battalions.
And what does that security look like? Does it include Israel's continued military presence in Gaza, which Hamas certainly doesn't want? I don't think the Palestinians are seeking that. I'm not sure the international community necessarily sees a viable Gaza under persistent Israeli military occupation. So the Israelis have said Israel cannot accept the demand for the removal of all its forces from the Gaza Strip, end the war and leave Hamas in power. But that essentially is what Hamas, in terms of those 3 phases that I've laid out, are seeking: the withdrawal of Israeli forces in the different phases, But by the end of the third phase, they want all the Israeli troops out of Gaza, and that appears to be the major sticking point here.
Now, we also understand that the Security Council will hold a closed meeting later today to discuss the discovery of mass graves in the vicinity of 2 hospitals in Gaza. What do we expect there?
Yeah, unclear if we'll get an immediate product, but what the Algeria, of course, the Arab and African, one of the African non-permanent members on the council, called for this meeting, and they've called for briefings by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, and the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese. They will be briefing behind closed doors, so we won't have a purview into that meeting where they will lay out the facts as well as they know it to the members of the council. And what I think you will see emerge from one wonders if it will be a broad consensus, but certainly some consensus among council members is a call for an independent international investigation to examine, to investigate these mass graves that were discovered at the Al-Shifa and Al-Nasser hospital complexes. Of course, you have competing narratives as to what happened in terms of how those bodies ended up in these mass graves. And that, I think, is what you'll hear from Volker Turk, calling for an international investigation so as to establish the facts as to who has culpability in terms of what might have happened at those 2 hospital complexes in the weeks that have certainly brought us here.
All right, Sherwin, thank you very much for that reportage. That's SABC correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York for us.